Welcome back to the Deep Dive. We're here to take raw information and really turn it into knowledge you can use, pulling out those must-know insights so you can get smart and get smart fast.
The goal is always to give you that quick but really thorough understanding.
Exactly. And hopefully we'll find some of those surprising facts along the way that just make the whole topic stick. So today we have, well, it's a fascinating, almost philosophical deep dive. Our sources are from a document that's titled, and I find this a little bit mysterious, Excerpts from Compositional Exercises.
Right, and while that title is, very specific, the core subject matter, what these excerpts are actually about, is writing practice.
Exactly. And for you, the learner, the person who wants to just grasp the essence of something quickly, the real value here is in dissecting these labels. I mean, why these words?
Why did they choose compositional exercises and not, say, creative writing prompts?
Right. What do the labels themselves tell us about how they approached mastering communication? We aren't even looking at the exercises themselves, just the codified intent behind them.
The philosophy of the practice.
Yeah. Okay, let's unpack this.
So you're right, there's this deliberate tension in the title.
A huge tension. It's an excerpt from something called Compositional Exercises, but then the subtitle just says Writing Practice. It feels like if the topic is just practice, why wrap it in all that formality?
Well, I think that framing is where the real knowledge nugget is. I mean, when you hear compositional exercises, it immediately tells you this is not a casual, just write what you feel kind of approach.
No, it sounds serious. It sounds academic almost.
It's systematic, it's structured. It implies there's a curriculum here, a design path that's meant to get you to a very specific point of mastery.
A repeatable path.
That's the key. So the foundational definition here is that these compositional exercises are structured approaches designed to improve a skill. And when you connect that idea to writing practice, you realize this isn't about, say, fluency.
It's not just about getting words out.
No, it's about precision. The source is basically defining this practice as refining the execution and the arrangement of ideas, not just, putting them on paper.
I think we need to stay on that idea of structure for a second. For the listener, what do you think should stand out about approaching writing through this kind of defined, almost clinical practice, as opposed to, the romantic idea of waiting for the muse to strike?
I think what stands out is the sheer intentionality of it. And consider the weight of that word, excerpts.
Right. I was wondering about that, too.
It suggests this isn't something someone just came up with. It's part of a much larger, codified, maybe even historical body of knowledge.
So it implies these methods weren't just invented on the fly. They probably belong to a very specific school of thought, or maybe a long-standing tradition. We're just looking at a fragment of a curriculum.
A curriculum that was important enough to preserve an excerpt. That makes perfect sense. An excerpt implies there's a whole methodology behind it. It's like finding one chapter of a master's textbook, right? That single chapter can tell you so much about the level of detail and the rigor of the entire work.
Precisely. And that rigor is inherently compositional. The big picture idea here is that the authors are saying mastery of writing can be achieved through targeted, measurable training.
So not just through innate talent.
Not at all. The pedagogical implication is crystal clear. If you understand the structure, you can replicate excellence.
Okay, that raises a really important question then, just based on these titles alone. And what makes a practice compositional versus just, say, descriptive?
The intention. The intention changes everything. Descriptive practice, or what you might call fluency practice, is usually aimed at output.
Like, how many words can I write? How quickly? How detailed can I make my description of this room?
Exactly.
Yeah.
But compositional practice, it aims at function. It's all about the strategic organization of information to achieve a very specific rhetorical goal, a specific effect on the reader. So we're moving past the mechanics of a single sentence and focusing more on the architecture of the entire argument.
That's a perfect way to put it, the architecture.
Okay, let's make this really concrete for the listener. If we accept that this deep dive is a shortcut to being well-informed, what kind of specific techniques can we infer these exercises must have covered, even without seeing the full text?
This is where it gets really interesting because we can deduce the types of exercises just from that label compositional. And I think we can infer at least 3 major areas that would separate this from simple writing drills.
Okay, all right.
So the first is almost certainly the principle of arrangement. The classical term is dispositio. A compositional exercise wouldn't just say, write a report
No, it's too simple.
It would demand you place your strongest argument at a specific, strategic point in the text, maybe right before the conclusion, not at the beginning, all to maximize reader impact and memory.
I see. So the exercise is forcing you to think spatially about information. You're not just writing, you're literally mapping out the reader's entire journey through your logic.
You're controlling their experience.
Yeah. If you start really strong, the reader might assume the rest is just as powerful. But if you hold back and then you deliver that knockout punch near the end, you control the emotional payoff.
Exactly right. The practice isolates that one skill arrangement. Okay, a second type of exercise we could infer would be something like thesis refinement under pressure.
Thesis refinement under pressure. Okay, what does that mean?
Well, most writing practice lets you sort of slowly, iteratively refine an idea. You write a draft, you think about it, you change it. A compositional exercise, though, would likely demand you take a vague or complex claim and sharpen it into a concise, defendable thesis statement.
With a time limit.
A severe time constraint to force immediate intellectual clarity.
That is a phenomenal distinction. It really targets the mental bottleneck, doesn't it? It's not about how well you can research a topic. It's about how efficiently you can crystallize the absolute core of your idea.
It really is. I imagine that kind of practice would quickly separate a truly strong writer from just a functional one.
Yeah, it moves the focus from just exploring a topic to actively asserting a clear position.
It does. And it brings us to the third, and maybe the most vital compositional exercise we can infer, and that's counter-argument integration.
Counter-argument integration. That sounds less about structure and more about sort of strategic engagement. How does that fit under composition?
Oh, it is the ultimate structural challenge. Think about it. A true compositional exercise wouldn't let you just ignore opposing views.
Or just tack on a rebuttal at the end.
Never. It would require you to structurally embed the strongest possible counterargument into your own text. And not at the end, but maybe right before you present your primary evidence.
Why there?
To neutralize skepticism early. It shows the reader you have complete command of the material, that you've already thought through the objections.
It's a power move.
It elevates the entire practice to strategic design. You're not just composing a statement anymore, you're composing a complete intellectual defense system. And that makes your argument far more persuasive and much, much harder to refute.
That's a fascinating insight, and it really does move the conversation past this generic idea of structure. But, okay, here's a critical challenge then. If these excerpts are so focused on composition, on this strategic arrangement and architecture, doesn't that risk stifling the spontaneity, the creative flow that often generates the best ideas in the first place?
That is a perfectly valid concern. I'm sure it's one that the original authors must have grappled with. But the very premise of compositional exercises seems to suggest that fluency and descriptive skill are, necessary precursors.
Table stakes.
Exactly, table stakes. But ultimately insufficient for true mastery.
So how do you square that circle?
Think of it like this. The rules of composition aren't meant to be shackles. They're more like the grammar for structure itself. A master musician has to internalize the structure of a sonata, know it cold.
Before they can improvise brilliantly within it.
Precisely. These exercises provide the intellectual scaffolding. The goal is that when you do sit down for that more creative piece of writing, the structural choices become second nature, they become automatic. It frees up your cognitive load to focus on generating brilliant ideas and finding the perfect language.
So understanding the blueprint allows you to stop thinking about the blueprint, and then you can start, building the skyscraper more creatively. That is the kind of shortcut we look for. So for the learner who's trying to gain knowledge quickly, the takeaway here is that understanding the intent of the training is just as important as the training itself. If your goal is compositional excellence, persuading someone, structuring a report, crafting an argument, you need these kinds of targeted drills, not just, high-volume journaling.
Exactly. The lesson baked into these excerpts is that intentional practice leads to efficient mastery. If your practice isn't targeting arrangement or assertion refinement or counter-integration, you might be practicing, but you aren't really training for compositional function.
It's all about the quality of the practice, not just the quantity. And, recognizing the constraints of our material here, that we only have the titles and the concept, it kind of forces you to admire the efficiency of the language they use.
It really does.
Compositional exercises and writing practice. Just those 4 words define an entire world of rigorous, structured learning focused on construction.
And we've thoroughly analyzed these concepts purely based on that literal scope. The power is in how those carefully chosen words communicate a whole sophisticated methodology.
So what does this all mean?
Well, I think it means our deep dive confirms that this knowledge set, whatever it is built on the belief that strategic, structured exercises are the most direct route to mastering the sophisticated architecture of writing.
It elevates writing from just a craft to more of an engineering discipline?
That's a great way to put it.
We've moved beyond just saying structure, and we've explored some really concrete techniques we can infer from it. Targeted arrangement, forceful thesis refinement, and that strategic counter-argument integration. We've really established the value proposition here, the how, the practice, have to be informed by the why, the compositional goal.
Right.
And we've seen the enormous implied value of these excerpts for anyone who's serious about improving their communication skills. But now I want to leave you with a final provocative thought to mull over, one that builds directly on what we've uncovered.
Okay.
If we accept this premise, that structured compositional practice is the key to mastery, and we now have a good idea this involves specific things like arrangement and integration, then the real power isn't just in following someone else's curriculum, it's in designing your own.
I see where you're going with this.
So if you are tasked with creating your own definitive compositional exercise, focused entirely on what you know is your single weakest writing practice area, maybe that's organizing a complex sequence of events, or maybe it's just transitioning smoothly between totally different topics, what specific single-task exercise would you prioritize?
That's a great question.
Design the one drill that, if you perfected it, would unlock your compositional fluency. Reflect on your own approach to communication mastery.
A personal compositional exercise. I like that.
And that's all the time we have for this deep dive. Thank you for joining us in unpacking the structure and the strategic intent behind these powerful labels. We'll catch you next time.